Hi, I'm Dr. Carol Francis, and along with all of my training as a psychologist, a marriage family therapist, clinical hypnotherapist, NLP practitioner, yada yada yada, so you get the idea. I've also done a lot of training in shamanism, Akashic records, astral projection, remote viewing, lucid dreaming. Well, you get the idea. I'm very, very amazed at how powerful the spiritual aspect of our life enters into every aspect, including relationship satisfaction. But what's really interesting to me is I also see people use their spirituality and use their religious affiliations to keep themselves bound or trapped to relationships that are not satisfying and not helpful. So as a marriage and family child therapist and psychologist and working with couples, I'm very aware that sometimes the adherence to religious belief or spiritual belief is like saying, well, I need to stay here and learn my lesson. I need to stay here because I've made a commitment and as part of my connection to God that I'm very loyal and very faithful. And all of those things in an adequate or satisfying or safe relationship makes a lot of sense. In fact, that can energize you to stay put and stay connected even during very difficult times, as well as have the faith to be able to propel something into something more satisfying. But it doesn't need to bind you or collapse you into enduring abuse. And abuse can come in all forms. And how do we define abuse is a little bit amorphous. We can go into the legal definition. So let's do that for a moment. Abuse can be physical, emotional, and psychological. So abuse by the legal system in the state of California and throughout different states throughout the United States is that you are not to be name-called, you're not to be intimidated, you're not to be derogatorily talked to on an ongoing chronic basis in a way that makes the other person one up and you one down. You're not to be physically pushed, grabbed, crushed, and definitely not to be bruised, broken, or threatened with physical harmful weaponry, including the physical body. So that would be part of abuse. Psychological abuse, you're not to be kept under threat, under duress. You're not supposed to be trapped or kidnapped emotionally. You're not to be always living in fear of being hit or mauled or raped. So there's all these different forms of abuse. You can see that those all feel very abusive. So what happens when an emotional abuse or psychological abuse can be very subtle? And one of the things that's really interesting about psychological and emotional abuse that I want you to understand so that you don't attach it to, I need to learn my spiritual lesson, is that the abuser can try to make you feel very connected to them. In other words, if you're spiritual and if you care for me and love me, you'll accept me when I'm even hurting you, and then you'll forgive me afterward, because forgiveness is part of the spiritual quest. Understanding that individuals have all sorts of different complications and shadow selves is part of the spiritual quest. Or so the meme of spirituality is often stated as. The truth is that a manipulator, either a conscious or unconscious manipulator who's abusive, can actually use those statements against you to keep you attached and give you just a good number of days making you feel good about loving them, accepting them, and that they might be repaired and they might get better and they might not do it again, or that you're very noble and wonderful because you're so giving and loving and accepting and long-suffering and things of that sort. The truth is that if they're using that to keep you there and justify that they have a right to treat you disrespectfully, then they are actually twisting like a wolf in sheep's clothing the very deep spiritual connection and belief and faith and honor that you want to carry throughout your life. One thing that you might want to think about, and I'll just quote Christ for a moment. He says, "Don't cast your pearl before the swine." So if you have a lot of love to give, you have to be sure that you're not giving it to someone who actually is going to contaminate it and sabotage it. Remember, he's the one that got angry and threw the money changers out of the temple, even though they were supposedly earning money for the temple. So the idea was, you don't have to be long-suffering when someone's being disrespectful. You don't have to adhere to being in someone else's space or presence if they're not able to treat you with respect and clarity. It may actually be part of your karmic walk, so to speak, or your spiritual release, to move yourself out of bondage with someone who will keep you trapped to their shadow sides and say, I'm done. And then you can live your freedom of your spirit and soul. This is not an easy decision to make. In fact, most individuals who are in abusive relationships take between 6 to 7 times to actually extricate themselves out of the abusive situation and into a healthy situation. In fact, they might repeat the unhealthy pattern, actually contributing to the pattern being created because it's what you understand, and that's more complicated. You might actually be having a harder time getting yourself out of abusive connections, and learning how you play a part in that is really important. That may be your walk, learning how to not only disengage from the bondage of an abuser, but how to not play the part that keeps that dynamic going, but how to live free so that you are free in spirit and in touch with the cosmos that would much rather have you experiencing love, wholeness, health, freedom. Those are wonderful, wonderful traits that I think the universe wants to breathe into you, and you need to breathe it into yourself. And if you're in an environment full of toxicity, poisons, much like even the pollution of our planet, then you may need to go someplace else where you can actually start breathing fresh, honest, natural air so you can be your true spiritual and beautiful physical self. This is Dr. Carol Francis.